I buried them both in the same week. My wife in a closed casket because there wasn't much left. My son in silence, because no one could explain how a 7-year-old vanishes mid-air without a trace. They called it a tragedy. I called it a slaughter in the sky, and for 29 years I accepted that I would never know the truth. Until last Thursday, in the basement of a museum, I heard my wife's death lie to me. I'm Sam Golovin. Once I kept planes from touching. Now I mop floors in a place that glorifies the very system that broke me. Retired air traffic controller, volunteer cataloger, ghost in khakis. Nobody suspects a man like me has a reason to listen too closely. But I always listen. That's what I was trained to do, to hear the impossible and make sense of it before metal met metal. That day, I was cataloging tapes, donated reels and cassettes from old FAA boxes. Some were training loops, some unlabeled junk. Then I found one, gray Maxell cassette, masking tape label, handwritten, NB217, radar, night. My hands stopped working. NB217, that was her flight. Linda and Josh, Cincinnati to Portland, red-eye route. March 3rd, 1994, never made it. The official line? Weather, radar blind spots, pilot error. But I worked that shift. I took the last check-in, and nothing about that night felt like a mistake. I plugged in the old player, slapped on headphones, pressed play. Static hissed through like wind in a hangar. Then voices, clipped, ghosts from 30 years ago. My stomach tightened. I recognized one, Morales, junior radar tech. Nervous, always overcorrecting. Then the room went cold. A new voice, deep and unshakable, broke in over the chatter. November Bravo 217, you've got traffic, 2 o'clock, 10 miles. Negative, a pilot replied. We show clear. Then, override that. Maintain current heading. That voice, Dwight Klein. Dwight fucking Klein. My shift supervisor. The man who told me to stop asking questions after the crash. The man who sent me home that morning and told me to forget what I'd heard on the screen. He never showed up at Linda's memorial. Never said a word about Josh. And now here he was, on tape, issuing an override, on a traffic alert, for a flight that was supposed to be alone in that corridor. That override never made it into the NTSB report. There was never any mention of conflicting traffic. Not one word about a second aircraft in NB217's airspace. But I heard it, clear as dawn. I rewound, played it again. Override that, maintain current heading. God damn it, Klein. I felt something twist in my chest. But it wasn't grief this time. It was direction. After all these years, someone had left a crack in the armor, a sliver of truth where there'd only been silence. I logged the tape, not in the museum system, in my old FAA logbook, the one I hadn't opened in decades, the same one that held Linda's final flight log. I wrote in red ink the way we used to mark critical errors. Second aircraft, suppressed, start again. For 29 years, I'd lived in fog, retired early, drifted, let the pain become background noise. But now I had a bearing. If there was another plane that night, someone made sure we never saw it, and whoever buried it is still out there. They think I'm old, they think I'm broken, but they forgot one thing. A controller never stops tracking. I couldn't sleep that night. The override voice haunted me in dreams, a phantom whisper demanding I probe the darkness. By dawn, I was in the museum's research room, face pale, hands shaking slightly as I opened the archival cabinet. Lila Pack was already there. She looked up from her browser, startled to see me so early. Lila was young, about 35, bright, sharp-eyed, always polite, almost maternal in her quiet way. She'd joined me as a volunteer digitizing old flight logs and tapes. I'd learned she was the granddaughter of a flight attendant who died aboard NB217. She carried grief like I did, but still pushed forward. "Sam?" she asked. I didn't reply. I held up the NB217 tape. "Found something new," I said. "Something never in the report." She nodded slowly, as if bracing. "Let me help," she said. I watched her fingers dance across her keyboard, connecting the analog tape to a digitizer, cleaning up static, amplifying marginal frequencies. We worked in a hush, as though paranoia itself lurked in the corners. By late morning, a rough waveform lay mapped on the display. I traced it, heart fierce. "Lila, overlay this on known 1994 radar corridors," I said. "See whether anything falls outside the official skeleton." She hesitated, then pulled up mapping software. She imported historic radar corridors, juxtaposed them with what we now call ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast Data. She overlaid flight paths, corridors, airway boundaries, exclusion zones. She faded in modern flight lanes and airways with the 1994 skeleton, toggling transparency. Then she froze. Her screen revealed a narrow, faint line, a sliver of trajectory that cut between official corridors. A ghost lane, one pruned from the maps before the crash. A path that a plane might have flown, but which no public document ever acknowledged. I leaned over. "Trace it backward." "Where does it start?" I murmured. She zoomed out. The line ran from just past the border of our center's control sector, entering alignment right before the NB217 path. It curved subtly, almost like a hidden shortcut in the sky, somewhere between trees of altitude and layers of controlled zone. I felt a cold rush in my chest. If this corridor had been active the night of the crash and erased afterward, someone had gone to enormous lengths to hide it. "Show it in a demo," I said quietly. "Let's present the overlay at the evening museum session. I want people asking, 'Where did this come from?'" She opened her mouth to object, but I held up my hand. "Yes, there's risk, but there's no victory in silence." That afternoon, a bright-faced journalist arrived. Her name was Nadia Petrov. She said she was doing a feature on aviation safety, wanted access to museum archives, and had heard I was working with Lila. She looked more curious than skeptical, her notebook open. I observed her carefully. Maybe naive, maybe useful. When the museum's daily demo began, I asked that our radar overlay slide be added to one of the public exhibits, digitally hidden in the back, not part of the main show. The gallery room filled, school children, retired pilots, aviation buffs. When the museum presenter toggled to the overlay, murmurs circled the room. The line appeared, the ghost lane. A ripple passed through the audience. Phones came out. People whispered. Within minutes, a curious visitor snapped a photo and posted it online. Within the hour, the overlay had gone viral among aviation forums. People speculated. A mapping glitch? A forgotten military corridor? A database error? But the more the crowd questioned, the more pressure built. Next morning, my museum supervisor, Janet Rios, cornered me in the hallway. Her voice trembled. "Sam, remove the overlay." "I'm sorry. Orders came down from upstairs. The Mallory Foundation insists it be withdrawn." Mallory Foundation, the museum's major sponsor. Their money kept wings polished and exhibit halls open. Their name meant influence. Janet's eyes were desperate, haunted, like she'd just swallowed a bitter pill. "I can't," I said. "Not yet. People saw it. I need time." She shook her head. "You'll lose your volunteer position. Mallory's not joking." She hurried away before I could press more. By afternoon, I received an encrypted email from an address, Silver Fox. The subject line, "For your ears only." Inside it was a redacted NTSB memo, fragmentary, marked confidential, signed by Frank Odell, a name I hadn't heard in years, but once trusted, once admired. In that memo, one line stood out: route conflict deleted by order, for stability. My gut dropped. The word deleted felt like a punch. Nadia found me in the archives later. She handed me a slip of paper. "Do you want power or silence?" No signature, but in the margin someone had written, "Don't trust what you see." When she left, I stared at the ceiling tiles. My hands felt cold. The maze was deeper than I imagined. My heart pounded with two things: fear and a craving I hadn't felt in decades. I would pull back the dead sky. I would force the world to look through the static. Because whoever hid this wasn't just covering up a crash. They were bleeding out secrets. And this time, I was going to chase them all the way. You don't get invited to a Mallory Foundation gala unless someone wants something. The invitation came sealed in silver foil, the kind of expensive gloss that sticks to your fingertips like guilt. I knew I shouldn't go, but buried in the envelope was a handwritten note. "Come see what they celebrate. It'll explain what they bury." No signature. I showed up in a rental blazer that still smelled faintly of plastic wrap. The gala was held in the glass atrium of the museum, just beneath the suspended Boeing 707, the same model Linda used to work on. The room glowed with soft jazz and champagne. The air buzzed with money and self-congratulation. I kept to the shadows. Victor Mallory was there, of course, the old tycoon himself. He stood like a marble statue in a navy suit that probably cost more than my car, shaking hands with governors and oil barons. His daughter Tess Mallory flanked him, elegant, composed. She ran the foundation now, part CEO, part social diplomat. I didn't care about the speeches. I cared about the system running behind them. Earlier that day, I had preloaded a mirrored copy of the radar overlay onto a USB stick. One of the exhibits was digital, a live radar installation meant to show kids how airspace is managed in real time. I'd helped maintain it for months. I knew its firmware like the back of my hand. At 7:13 p.m., while most guests were focused on the hors d'oeuvres and real estate gossip, I slipped into the back console and synced the exhibit's feed to a modified display loop. Then I waited. At 7:21, the radar feed refreshed. The screen glitched briefly. Then, slowly, deliberately, the ghost flight reappeared. A white blip moving eastbound, across what was officially a closed corridor. At first, nobody noticed. Then a retired airline pilot, nursing his wine near the radar screen, squinted. "That lane's been closed since '94, he muttered. "Why is it active?" Others began to murmur. Victor Mallory turned his head. His eyes narrowed. For a split second I thought I saw fear, or maybe recognition. Then his expression reset, practiced and unreadable. Tess Mallory approached. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at me. "You did this," she said quietly, almost like a compliment. "I just let the past speak," I replied. She stared for a moment longer. Then, without another word, she handed me a card, her private office address, and whispered, "Come by tomorrow. Off the record." As she walked away, her heels echoing against marble, my phone buzzed in my pocket. No name. Just a message from an anonymous account. From Silver Fox. Check your inbox. New drops. Frank signed the original report, but not the version they printed. I ducked into the hallway and opened the attached file. A memo. FAA internal. The header read, National Transportation Safety Board. Draft for review. The signature at the bottom. Frank Odell, former NTSB investigator, now retired. Once my mentor. The memo had been heavily redacted, but enough was there. NB-217 incident included corridor overlap with unregistered business jet. Route conflict deleted by order of Administrative Council. Rationale: prevent public destabilization during transition period. Below that, a single line in bold: deviation from standard report procedure authorized by Director Dwight Klein. My breath left my lungs like a missile hit me in the chest. Klein. Again. Always Klein. The bastard hadn't just been on the radio. He'd helped erase the truth from the investigation itself. If Odell signed this draft, it meant he knew. And if it was deleted, then he either folded or someone made him disappear into silence. I sat down hard on a museum bench, surrounded by fake aircraft parts and donor plaques. My ears rang, not from noise, but from fury. For decades, I thought my grief was private, personal. Now I understood. It was engineered. They buried my wife and son under a paper trail of lies, and they kept the public from ever seeing the shape of the air that night. I pressed my fingers into my temples, steadying myself. I was on their radar now. The moment that blip appeared on that demo screen, I'd crossed a line. And once you cross it, there's no turning back. On my way out, I passed the radar screen again. The crowd had thinned, but that ghost blip still floated in the dark, pixel perfect, stubborn. Silent proof of a night the FAA wants erased. I stood there a moment longer, watching it loop, not blinking, because I needed to remember they killed her in the dark, and I was going to drag every single one of them into the light. Frank Odell lived exactly where I expected him to, off-grid, but not quite unplugged. An old farmhouse near the edge of an airfield that hadn't seen a plane since 2007. Faded siding, rust-bitten mailbox. No doorbell, just a weather-beaten brass knocker shaped like a bird with wings tucked in, like it knew how to keep a secret. It had taken me 3 hours and one favor to get his address. Lila ran his name through her aviation archives and cross-referenced it with a decommissioned employee database. She hesitated when she handed me the printout. "You sure he'll talk?" she asked. "I'm not here for confession," I said. "I'm here for closure." But I lied. I wanted a confession. I wanted to see if his face flinched when I said Linda's name. I wanted to ask what happened in the years between the draft he wrote and the report that erased my family. The door creaked open. Frank looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, wrapped in a cardigan 3 sizes too big, clutching a coffee cup like it was the last warm thing in his life. But his eyes, those hadn't changed, still sharp, still watching everything. "Sam," he said. No surprise, no warmth, just my name, like a puzzle he thought he'd solved years ago. "I brought the past," I replied. He stepped aside. The inside of his house smelled like newsprint and black tea. Floorboards groaned beneath our feet. We sat in his kitchen. He didn't offer coffee, and I didn't ask. I placed the redacted memo on the table. He didn't even look at it. "I know what it is," he said. I waited. Frank exhaled. Not a sigh. More like surrender. "I wrote the original draft the night after the crash. I stayed in the office until 4 a.m. I was angry. I believed in the report, believed we could tell the truth and still be whole. But you didn't." "No," he said softly. "We didn't." He reached into a drawer, pulled out a weathered manila folder. Inside were pages covered in notes, his notes, handwritten annotations in the margins, circles around flight paths. Red ink slashes through sections marked unconfirmed. One phrase was underlined 3 times. "Route 44A, suspended?" "That ghost corridor," I muttered. Frank nodded. Route 44A was supposed to be closed as of March 2nd, but it wasn't. There was a priority flight that night, a medical transfer, organ donor from D.C. to Chicago. someone high up. They reopened the corridor without announcing it, and NB-2017 flew straight into it. Not quite. They were vectored across it. By who? I demanded. Frank finally looked at me. That's the part I can't prove. Klein cleared the shift logs, deleted his own override from the system before the backups triggered. Only way we found it was a redundancy cache. One backup tape. The one you found. I leaned forward. You tried to stop the cover-up? He hesitated. I tried. But there were two problems. First, the FAA didn't want panic. Admitting a secret corridor was open during a crash? That would have led to lawsuits, congressional hearings, maybe worse. Second? Frank swallowed hard. I was told to stand down by the Department of Transportation. That silenced the room. He pulled out another paper. This one wasn't FAA. It was a memo from DOT, brief, stamped, and chilling. All public documentation of NB-2117 must conform to NTSB Narrative Version C. Route 44A references are to be removed. Justification: national confidence during infrastructure transition. Infrastructure transition? I asked. Frank laughed, but it wasn't humor. They meant the shift to privatized airspace management. 1994 was the test bed year. Private sector lobbyists were already inside the fence. You mean Mallory? Frank nodded. Victor Mallory had contracts with the FAA through his subsidiaries. Radar digitization, route simulation, quiet deals. You think they'd risk exposing his corridor? He paused. He was grooming his daughter even then. Tess. They erased the flight path to protect their future. That corridor, Sam. It was never about safety. It was about ownership. I stared at the memo. My hands clenched into fists. They killed my family to protect a business model. Frank looked at me long and hard. They didn't mean to kill them. They just didn't care enough not to. That was the moment I felt it. Not grief, not anger, hatred. Not for the clouds, not for the systems, but for men, for Frank, for Klein, for Mallory, for the polished hands that had signed death into margin notes. Frank stood slowly, as if the weight of the truth had finally settled in his bones. I should have fought harder, he said. Yes, I replied. You should have. He didn't argue. When I left the house, the sky was slate gray, the kind of color that never lets the sun through. I stood in the gravel driveway, breath fogging in front of me, and for the first time in 29 years, I stopped thinking of the crash as a mystery. It was an execution, and Frank O'Dell had pulled the trigger with a pen. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. He'd already signed his confession. It's strange what you remember when you're planning revenge. The scent of coffee that morning hit me too late. I'd already poured the grounds into the sink before realizing I hadn't added water. My hands were shaking again. Not from age, not from fatigue, from clarity. The kind that hits you after you've buried grief and dug up purpose. I sat at the table, the NB-2017 tape beside me, its black plastic casing still cold. Next to it, my old FAA logbook, now dog-eared from fresh use, and a yellow notepad filled with names, dates, procedural codes. I wasn't just going to make noise anymore. I was going to set a trap. Nadia met me at the museum that afternoon, expression grim. She'd been chasing FOIA requests, filing them through aliases, feeding the system drip by drip. The moment we pushed too hard, they'd close ranks, so we gave them a paper trail so slow it looked harmless. We requested Klein's personnel file, his shift records, every document related to unscheduled traffic routing in March of '94. Then we added unrelated queries to bury the signal in the noise, radar tower maintenance logs, Catering invoices, training memos from a decade too late, bureaucracies choke on detail. Within 48 hours, we had our first bite. A mid-tier FAA administrator named Arman Singh called Nadia. He didn't want to meet at the museum. He asked her to come alone to a sandwich shop in Arlington. Instead, we both went. And I sat 2 booths away, hidden behind a copy of Aviation Week I hadn't read in 20 years. Singh was nervous, hands twitching, voice low. "I shouldn't even be talking to you," he said. "But you're not wrong. Something's buried deep." "What do you know about the route?" Nadia asked. He looked around, leaned in. There was a private jet in the sky that night. Not filed through public channels. It was part of a medical transfer. Organ donor. What kind of transfer needs its own hidden corridor? One where the recipient's last name is on a building in D.C. That said enough. According to Singh, the FAA had authorized an emergency reinstatement of Route 44A to allow for a high-speed medical jet, an air ambulance, but privately contracted. The flight was meant to pass unnoticed, routed silently through radar corridors never meant to overlap. They were supposed to have the corridor alone, Singh whispered, but someone cleared NB-217 across it. "Who?" Nadia pressed. Singh hesitated. Then, "Your guy, Klein." I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears. "He filed a secondary flight strip," Singh said. "Buried it, the one that confirmed both aircraft in the same corridor." "Where is it now?" He shook his head. "Redacted, locked under order, but they can't deny it existed. That's why they're nervous." I left a 20 under my coffee cup and walked out before Singh saw me. Nadia followed 5 minutes later. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to old tapes, trying to hear what hadn't been said. Between every clipped transmission, every silence too long to be accidental, I felt it. Interference. Something deliberate. My console that night. Could it have been altered? Could the radar image itself have been diverted? I pulled out my old console logbooks, flipped to March 3rd, 1994, lines in red. Flight progression for NB-217, cruising at FL 370. Weather en route, routine handoff. But then a scratch out, a correction, one I hadn't made. Re-cleared to FL 330, direct OVR-VOR via Corridor B. That was never part of their original routing. It wasn't even airspace I controlled. Yet the handwriting matched mine. I stared at the page for a long time. Someone had accessed my logs, altered them, quietly enough that even I missed it. That night, I wrote 5 words in the back of the logbook. They killed her for someone richer. I didn't write Linda's name. I didn't write Josh's. But their absence from that sentence screamed. The next morning I arrived at the museum early. Lila had brought in her external drive. She'd been reconstructing partial data from the tape we found. We played a cleaned-up segment of audio again. There, beneath Klein's voice, barely audible, was another signal. An overlapping data burst, one not tied to civilian air traffic, a coded military frequency. Lila glanced at me. "You think the military was masking the jet? Or the radar was being spoofed to hide it? You really think the FAA and DoD would cooperate to falsify radar?" I looked her dead in the eye. "They didn't cooperate. They aligned. There's a difference." She didn't argue. That night I found myself back in the garage. I opened the old storage crate. My uniform was still there. The one I wore the night I cleared NB-217. I pressed the patch between my fingers. The emblem of a system I once trusted. Now, just another costume behind which they killed people quietly. Revenge stopped being theory that night. It became mission. And I wouldn't stop until every lie was pulled from the sky. Tape by tape, name by name, truth by terrifying truth. They said Frank Odell died of a heart attack. A man who once ran air crash investigations with iron nerves, gone in his sleep. No autopsy requested, no questions asked. The obituary read like a form letter. He served with distinction. He is survived by no one. But I knew Frank. He didn't die peacefully. He died silenced. I got the news from Lila, who called at 6:41 a.m., her voice brittle. She didn't cry, just said, "He's gone, Sam. The files are gone too." Gone. She meant the ones we hadn't copied yet. She'd visited him 2 nights earlier to drop off a spare hard drive. Frank had promised her everything: original memos, route charts, fragments of the original NB2117 timeline. But when she went back to retrieve it, the place had been wiped. Not burgled, cleared. Desk drawers empty. The old safe, he always said, was just for sentiment, missing. And Frank, cold in his chair, still wearing the sweater he'd had on during our last conversation. The news gutted me, not just because he was dead, but because I'd wasted the one chance to drag the truth out of him, all of it. I'd let him give me just enough to point fingers, but not enough to break the wall. I cracked. That night, I drank for the first time in 14 years. Not much. Just 2 fingers of whiskey I kept hidden in a box marked Old Keys. My doctor would have had a fit. But I needed the burn. I sat alone in my kitchen with the NB217 tape playing on loop, static licking the edges of Klein's voice, Linda's fate just a breath behind the hiss. I remembered her last phone call, remembered Josh's excitement about getting to sit by the window. I remembered the silence that followed, and I played the tape again and again and again. The whiskey numbed nothing, but the next morning I woke with a decision. If they were going to erase echoes, I'd give them signal. Back at the museum, I went straight to the radar demo. Not the public one this time, but the back-end system. The one that tied into a sandbox of ADS-B data for simulations. I knew what I was doing was illegal. Didn't care. Using a modified software bridge, something I'd been coding for weeks, I inserted a payload, a fragment of NB217's 1994 radar ghost. Not the full tape, just enough of the flight signal pattern to make the current map blink. To anyone watching the public ADS-B feed that night, it looked like a phantom flight blinked into existence at 2:44 a.m. over Cincinnati airspace, registered under a defunct call sign, no transponder ID, just there for 9 seconds, before vanishing. It caused no harm, no diversion, but it hit aviation boards like a thunderclap. "What is this?" they posted. "Why is an old call sign showing up in real-time data? Software bug? Ghost plane?" By morning, dozens of hobbyist radar sites had screenshots. One thread climbed to the top of an aviation forum titled NB217, Is the Sky Remembering? They didn't know the half of it. Mallory's people did. That afternoon, I was approached in the museum parking lot by a man in a dark gray jacket with security tags half tucked into his belt. Mid-40s, lean, alert eyes. "Mr. Golovin?" he said. I didn't answer. He stepped closer. "My name is Cole Reyes, head of museum security." Bullshit. I'd worked with the actual security team. College kids and retirees who carried walkie-talkies and wore reflective vests. Reyes wasn't one of them. "I think you should stop digging," he said flatly. I stared at him. "You're walking into controlled airspace," he added. Then he walked away. No threat, no badge, no business card, just a warning wrapped in aviation code. Controlled airspace, meaning watched, claimed, enforced. And just like that, I knew what Frank had meant when he told me they didn't care about truth, only order. That night, I wrote down everything I knew, taped a flash drive under my desk, sent encrypted backups to Lila and Nadia. If they were coming for me next, they'd have to fight a damn breadcrumb trail. I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop titled Operation Echo. The next time I broadcast, I wouldn't just make a radar blink. I'd make the sky scream. You can only scream into the void so long before you start building something that echoes back. That's what this had become. Not just revenge, not just truth, but reconstruction of the air, of the night, of a crime written in vapor and erased with silence. We needed eyes, not just mine, not just a blog post or a data dump. We needed a moment the world couldn't unsee. That's when the idea struck. I brought it to Lila and Nadia the same day I sketched it on a diner napkin. Hundreds of synchronized drones flying the exact 1994 route of NB-217, down to the minute. Recreating its last known trajectory, publicly, over FAA-authorized airspace, legal, visual, unignorable. Lila's eyes lit up. "We can do that," she said, "but not alone." She called in favors, former classmates from MIT's aerospace program, one guy who built drone swarms for wildfire mapping. Within a week, we had a warehouse in Dayton, 2 permits, and access to FAA demo space. We worked fast. Every drone carried a broadcast LED. Onboard code would light them red during the fatal corridor, Route 44A, and green elsewhere. The flight path would be displayed above the swarm on a projector rig, synced to a digital clock matching the time of the crash, 2:49 a.m. We called it Flight Reconstructed. Word spread. A few journalists RSVP'd, then influencers. Then, surprisingly, Tess Mallory herself requested attendance. "I want to see what you think you found," she wrote. Off the record. I didn't trust her, but I said yes. The night of the event, the hangar filled with faces, aviation nerds, press, skeptics, pilots in civilian jackets, even a few NTSB retirees, squinting like they didn't know why they came. Maybe some of them did know. Maybe guilt has a gravity all its own. At 2:43 a.m. we dimmed the lights. The drones lifted silently, green LEDs blinking like a heartbeat in the sky. One by one they formed the shape of NB-217's flight path. The audience watched, murmuring. At 2:48 the drones turned red. A slow gasp went up. The corridor we weren't supposed to know about, the one allegedly closed, flared into visual truth. Drones humming in perfect sync through the void Klein and Odell had tried to erase. And that's when I saw Tess Mallory's face go pale. She wasn't reacting to the red. She was reacting to the pattern. After the show, she approached me outside, breath visible in the cold. "You replicated a classified path," she said. "So it was real." I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She took a long breath. There were minutes missing from the NTSB's final timeline. No one could ever explain the gap. "You just saw it," I said. "It was never a gap. It was a detour." Then her phone buzzed. Her face stiffened. "You should go home, Mr. Golovin." "Why?" She didn't answer. But I did. "Because something's coming." I was right. 30 minutes later, Silver Fox dropped new files into our shared secure drive. Not just more memos. These were edit logs, metadata, change tracking data from the original NTSB report, timestamps, redline versions, hidden footnotes. At the bottom of the folder was a message. "If you're reading this, I've broken my promise." It was signed. Maya Odell. Lila gasped. "Wait, Maya?" she whispered. "That's my middle name." "No, not a coincidence." "Maya Odell," I said slowly, realization clawing its way into my spine. "You're Frank's granddaughter." She didn't deny it. "My mom changed her name after the crash," she said. "We went into hiding. Frank wanted me to stay safe, but I kept watching. And when I saw your name come up in a FOIA request..." She paused. I had to help. I stepped back, stunned. All this time, Lila, quiet, meticulous Lila, was Silver Fox. And now she was opening Frank's backup vault, the one even I hadn't known about. We drove that night to a storage unit under Maya's name. Inside, past camping gear and paint cans, was a fireproof safe. She opened it without hesitation. The files were there. Paper, analog, untraceable. The first thing I pulled out was a draft report, dated March 7th, 1994. I scanned it quickly. The routing data showed both NB-217 and the medical jet. Both plotted, both time-stamped. The routes intersected, and at the bottom of the page, underlined in blue ink, failure to detect conflict due to incorrect radar feed assigned to console B14. My console. The implication crushed my lungs. Someone hadn't just misled me. They'd rerouted my screen. The radar I'd been watching wasn't real time. It was a looped simulation. Someone else was feeding me fake clearance data while Linda's plane flew into a live corridor. I checked the note again, and then I saw it. Handwritten margin scribble in Frank's unmistakable scrawl. If this gets out, Sam's the fall guy. I dropped the paper. The air in the storage unit turned cold. They'd planned to pin it on me. But Frank had buried the truth alongside the lie. Maya touched my shoulder gently. We can prove this. With the edit logs, the voice prints, all of it. I turned to her. Then it's time we show them what was taken from the sky. I listened to the full tape again, but this time with a different kind of dread. Before, I'd wanted to hear the ghosts. Now I was hunting something colder. Myself. Maya, no longer Lila, sat across from me in the archive lab, her laptop screen glowing with digitized overlays from Frank's vault. She'd extracted matching radar loops, synchronized audio logs, and system metadata. Every part of the 1994 feed had been curated like a performance. But it wasn't until she played the uncut console record, mine, that I heard the sound that changed everything. Not the controller alert, not the override, my own voice. NB-217, maintain heading. You're clear through sector. I froze. Maya didn't speak. She just stared at me. I said that, I whispered. I gave the clearance. Yes, she said gently. But listen closer. She boosted the volume. Layered spectrograms appeared. Then she showed me the audio on another frequency. One civilian radar didn't monitor. The same phrase played. Same words. But not my voice. A different tone. A different cadence. Slightly off. Then Maya ran a voice print comparison. The clearance wasn't from me. Someone had recorded my voice, then stitched a deep fake over the loop, cutting and blending my clearance phrase to match the manipulated radar feed. Sam, Maya said, that console you sat at, it wasn't just diverted, it was pre-fed. That night you weren't dispatching. You were watching a movie someone made. I sat back, stunned. They hadn't just erased a corridor. They'd used me to kill my family. By proxy. With my voice. That realization cracked something in me. I asked Maya to play the sequence again. I wanted to hear every breath, every frequency anomaly, every faint distortion. We traced the voice sample to a modulation tool, military grade, the kind used in classified operations. Then we checked the system logs on the radar simulator they'd tested that night. Frank had scribbled down a name, Vulcan Echo, a classified military radar masking protocol. I stared at the name. It sounded like a weapon, because that's what it had been. Vulcan Echo was designed to project false radar signals, ghost flights, altered courses, onto commercial scopes. In the event of a national threat, it could scramble enemy surveillance, but someone had used it domestically to hide the organ jet and I was their useful idiot. "How is that legal?" I asked, voice brittle. "It wasn't," Maya said, and Frank tried to prove it. But after Vulcan Echo was repurposed for civilian defense testing, everything was redacted. Anyone who objected was blacklisted. "So he stayed quiet," I muttered. Maya nodded. "But then why pin it on me?" She pulled out another document, a contract, from 1994. FAA Advisory Consultant, Franklin Odell. And just below that, Subcontractor Approval for Interface Testing, NB217 bin Corridor. My name was listed, not in the original, but in the amended copy. "They rewrote the file," Maya said, "made it look like you volunteered your console for testing, so if anything leaked, it was your fault." I couldn't breathe. That's when I decided to look for him. Frank. If this was true, if the voice print matched, if Vulcan Echo was active, then Frank hadn't just hidden the truth. He'd engineered the cover-up, but he was dead. Or so I thought. Maya and I ran one more search, this time through defense contracting databases. We looked not for Frank Odell, but for his alias, the one he used in consulting circles. The name he'd used on a technical paper published 2 years ago on radar spoofing under the Mallory Foundation's private division. F. Odell Klein. I nearly vomited. Klein's name. It wasn't just an alias. It was a partnership. Frank hadn't died. He'd vanished into their world. We confirmed it 2 days later. Tess Mallory hosted a private foundation reception at the Skyview Hotel in D.C., the kind of place where NDAs are napkins and champagne flows with hush money. Maya got us in with borrowed media credentials. I wore a hat low and a suit 2 sizes too large, and there he was, Frank Odell, not frail, not dying, not gone, standing beside Tess Mallory, smiling as she called him a visionary in airspace safety reform. She pinned a medal to his chest. He didn't flinch, but I did. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. The man who taught me to value signal over silence, the man who hugged me after Linda's funeral, had stood on the ashes of my family and called it stability. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I walked out, breathed cold night air like it owed me something. Inside, they clinked glasses. But out here, I felt the fuse burn. Rage, once scattered, had crystallized. If Frank had built the lie, then I would bring down the whole tower, not with bullets, but with truth louder than any signal he ever falsified. There's something sacred about silence before a signal goes live. The museum's podcast studio wasn't much, just a soundproof booth wedged between the archives and the VR exhibit, but it had clean audio, a broadcast-grade feed, and an audience. We were going to use every inch of it. Nadia arranged the guest list under the pretense of a legacy interview. Reflections from aviation icons. She invited Frank Odell directly. No fake names, no aliases. Just, come speak. One last time. He said yes. Maybe because he thought he'd already won. Maybe because people who build lies eventually believe they're too big to fall. The night of the recording, Maya ran tech. Nadia manned the mic. I sat across from Frank in the dim booth, a cup of coffee between us, untouched. He looked older than he had at the gala, but sharper, more calculating. A man who thought every question had a safe answer. "You ready?" I asked. He nodded. We went live. Nadia's voice led in, smooth and professional. Tonight we're joined by 2 voices from aviation history, Samuel Golovin, retired air traffic controller, and Frank Odell, former NTSB lead investigator. We're here to talk about 1994, NB217, and the sky that changed everything. Frank smiled. Radio perfect. A tragic event, yes, but one that helped shape the reforms we rely on today. I leaned in. "Frank," I said, Do you remember the missing minutes? His smile didn't twitch. Not sure what you mean. The 7-minute radar gap from 2:43 to 2:50. The ones erased from the final NTSB timeline. I believe those were attributed to weather interference. No, I said. They were overwritten, and we have the edit logs. Maya tapped a key outside the booth. The projector lit up in the gallery beyond the glass, showing real-time metadata from Frank's own archived files, redline versions, deleted timestamps, comments tagged to his account. Frank blinked. Nadia leaned forward. Mr. Odell, did you knowingly alter the final NB217 report? I followed FAA protocol. Protocol didn't assign voiceprint overrides, I snapped. You did. The room went still. Then I asked the question only someone on the inside would know. What was the internal project name for the console feed redirection? Frank hesitated, and that was enough. Vulcan Echo, he said quietly. There it was. Confirmation. On air. In his own voice. He realized it the second the words left his mouth, but it was too late. Maya cut to a split screen, my 1994 console logbook, annotated. The voice samples layered together, my real voice, in the manipulated clearance. The deception played out like a timeline collapsing. And then the final blow landed, not from me, not from Maya, but from the man standing silently in the back of the booth all night. Cole Reyes. He removed his headset, eyes locked on Frank. Stop, he said. His voice cracked. Frank looked up. Security isn't part of this, son. Cole stepped forward. I'm not security, he said. Not really. Then he looked at me, and everything changed. Dad, he said. The room shattered. My lungs stopped working. He took off the ball cap, pulled back his collar, revealing a long, pale scar at his jawline. One I'd kissed when he was 7 after a bike fall. One I'd memorized. One I thought was buried under ocean and steel and fire. Josh? I whispered. He nodded. I survived. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. Time ruptured inside me. Frank tried to rise. That's not possible. Cole cut him off. I was pulled from the wreckage by a private emergency crew, transported off Manifest, raised under a different name. Why didn't they tell me? I asked, voice shaking. They said you died. Said no family survived. He looked at Frank. He said that. Frank's face twisted. I was protecting him. No, Cole snapped. You were protecting yourself. Outside the booth, the live feed kept streaming. The chat exploded. The confession had gone viral. Live. Frank stood, but no one followed. Then, with perfect calm, Maya stepped in front of the camera. There are more files, she said. More names, more routes, and we're releasing them all. Tess Mallory, watching from a private gallery monitor, screamed into her phone. But she was already too late. Maya hit upload. The entire encrypted vault, years of audio, memos, transcripts, radar overlays, falsified contracts, burst onto public servers, whistleblower portals, aviation boards, every site we'd seeded for weeks. Within an hour, the FAA issued a statement. Within 2, subpoenas hit the Mallory Foundation. Frank sat back down, silent now, defeated. I turned to Cole, no, Josh, and touched his shoulder. I looked for you, I said. I never stopped. I know, he whispered. I felt it. Every year. The recording light blinked off, but the signal was still loud. What was once static was now a scream. The world didn't change in a day. It never does. But the sky did. In the weeks following the broadcast, everything we'd feared and hoped came unglued. The FAA launched an emergency internal review, and for the first time in decades, their press office used the word complicity. The NTSB reopened the NB217 investigation under independent oversight. A joint congressional inquiry subpoenaed Mallory Foundation executives. Tess Mallory resigned for health reasons. Her father vanished behind legal walls. And Frank Odell? Gone. No arrest, no statement, no trace. Some said he fled the country. Others believed he was disappeared by the same hands that once used him. A few thought he ended it himself. I didn't care. Let the world decide what kind of ghost he became. What mattered was the signal. For the first time, the truth about NB-2017, the missing corridor, the masked radar, the falsified clearance, was not just known, but owned. By the people, by the families, by me and Josh. That part was harder. We sat on the museum's observation deck the following Sunday, the same one Linda used to visit just to watch night flights blink overhead. Cole, stood beside me in silence, watching the horizon turn from amber to steel. He hadn't said much since the reveal. Raised by the people who buried his mother, trained to protect the system that nearly erased him. His life had been a lie built on a lie. What do you say to a man who lost his identity in midair? So I said the only thing I could. I should have fought harder. He looked at me, then nodded. So should I. We sat, watching planes pass. Clean radar, no diversions, no ghosts. Then he asked, "Why didn't you stop?" I turned to him. Because the worst thing they ever did wasn't killing her. It was making me think she died for nothing. He looked away, jaw clenched. But now, I continued, people will remember. Not just her, not just you. All of them. From his pocket, he pulled out something small, scuffed, metal, familiar. A child's compass. I recognized it instantly. Josh had carried it everywhere as a kid. Linda gave it to him on his 7th birthday. The needle had stopped working years ago, frozen from some rough fall. But he kept it. All these years, he said, I held on to it. I smiled. Still broken? Still stuck. I laughed, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Then he handed it to me. Time you had it back. I closed my fingers around the cool metal. Sometimes broken things are the most honest. They don't pretend to point north anymore. They just remind you where you've been. That evening we walked through the museum. The new exhibit was already being assembled. It was called Voices in the Sky. Inside a glass case, Frank's handwritten notes, Maya's decrypted edit logs, my original clearance tapes. Nearby, a looping video of the drone reenactment, red lights flaring in silent choreography. And next to it all, the final radar screen, the one Maya rebuilt from Frank's corrupted files. There, glowing steady, was NB-2117's last known vector, a corridor that once vanished, now lit. The display pulsed once every second, a slow, soft ping, like a metronome in the dark. I used to blame the storm, I said, for what happened that night. Josh nodded. And now? I pointed to the radar. Now I see the men behind the clouds. He didn't speak, just stood with me as the ping kept counting. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in 30 years. Peace? Maybe not. But presence. Linda wasn't just gone. She was marked, acknowledged. Her story no longer buried under redacted ink and bureaucratic fear. And Josh? He wasn't lost. He was here. We walked out together, the hum of late flights overhead, lights blinking like Morse code from the heavens. Before we left, I turned back, watched the radar pulse one last time. See that? I whispered. Josh followed my gaze. That's where the sky broke. He nodded slowly. Then I smiled. Now it holds again. The door clicked shut behind us, and from inside the glass case the soft ping carried on, repeating across space, echoing across time, not just a memory, a message.